Good morning and good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar on empowering resilient banks, the immediate benefits of modernizing cryptography. My name is Steve Rampato. I'm a partner with Deloitte. I lead our financial services cyber practice globally, and I will be the moderator for this event. So while not an expert on cryptography, we've got a great number of folks on the call that will help us on this. So just a few housekeeping points before we get started. This webcast will be recorded and everybody will get a copy post-event. There is a Q&A box at the bottom. Please use that. The last 15 minutes of this webinar will be a question and answer, and you are able to resize your windows as needed to make parts of this a bit bigger. So just jumping in, introducing our speakers, we have Satish Katakam, Managing Director, Cybersecurity, Wells Fargo. In his current role, he is at the forefront of accelerating cybersecurity risk, prevention, reduction, and mitigation by applying emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and machine learning. Satish has 25 years of banking and industry experience delivering customer-first capabilities across many banking verticals. We have Daniel Apon, is a cryptography lead at the MITRE Corporation, based in McLean, Virginia, and is a co-organizer of MITRE's regionally launched Post-Quantum Cryptography Coalition. And Clement Jean-Jean, Senior Director at Sandbox. Clement leads go-to-market efforts in the commercial markets at Sandbox. Prior to that, he was the COO of CryptoSense, which was acquired by Sandbox in 2022. So just to tease things up a little bit, quick background, cybersecurity is a top risk for all global banks. Ransomware, phishing, DDoS, insider threat, supply chain, among some of the top risks CISOs and global organizations are facing. In addition, new regulation continues to advance, putting further strain as banks go through growing regulation and internal audit deficiencies. Throughout this, encryption technology is at the cornerstone of how information is protected in financial institutions. It's complex and it's everywhere. Now comes quantum, putting the very protection at risk as organizations deal with outdated technology that could put them at risk. In this webinar, we'll look at quantum risk and with our panel help demystify what post-quantum computing is and how modernizing the way you manage cryptography will help your organization improve today. So let's get started with a bit of a open-ended question. What is quantum risk and its implications for banking and financial services? And maybe Clement, I'll open up to you to get us kick-started with that opening question.
Thanks, Steve, and good morning, good afternoon, all. So there are a lot of opportunities with the development of quantum computers in solving problems like optimization issues. Some people see that quantum computers could help solve climate change issues, for instance. But this with super computational power that comes with quantum computer, we're facing a threat on one part of the cryptography that's used widely in every IT organization, namely asymmetric cryptography or RSA cryptography. And the risk comes from the fact that a mathematician called Peter Shor invented or discovered an algorithm almost 30 years ago that would allow to break RSA cryptography with the computational power of quantum computer. So the risk is that when these computers are fault tolerant, this entire security architecture or pyramid that relies on RSA cryptography would just be broken, which is a huge threat, not only to banking, but the entire digital economy. So the risk for financial institutions now is basically not to be ready on time when this happens. That's what needs to be considered. It's very unlikely that quantum computers, will be fault tolerant next year or in the next couple of years. It's going to take more time than that. But the risk is not to be ready on time. And there's another risk that I think we will dive a bit deeper into, which is having data, so properly encrypted data, unbreakable encryption stored now by attackers who can then break the encryption when they get a quantum computer in a few years, what people call store now to decrypt data.
Wonderful. Thanks, Clement. So Satish, you're at a global bank. Like, you can give us a bit more of a kind of banking perspective. How do you see it from where you're sitting right now?
Yeah, I mean, if we think about like adding on to what Clement just talked about, right? I mean, quantum computers are an eventuality, right? We know that the development of commercial grade quantum computers are coming fast into the environment. What it brings is it threatens to compromise our PKI and RSA implementations of cryptography worldwide in 8 to 12 years. Again, on the timing, opinions will vary greatly depending on who you ask, but it's kind of in that ballpark. And with quantum-inspired and alternative cryptanalysis methods, it could potentially accelerate the timeline as well. So where PQC comes into picture is directly addresses the coming threat to the financial ecosystem. Right? PQC intends to bring solutions, cryptography solutions to classical computing systems to secure even after the development of commercial grade quantum computers. The threat of quantum computing to the cybersecurity landscape is very broad. It transcends nationally, geographically, demographically, and industry-wide. And when you think about banking and financial entities, there's more and more interdependencies on large financial entities where they do business with each other across the globe. So you cannot single-handedly say, oh, I have a solution that is going to work. No, we need an ecosystem approach to solving this problem and mitigating the quantum threat for the future. So at the end of the day, financial institutions, industry associations, government partners, academic entities, and standard bodies all need to work together to solve this problem. We know it's coming. We just need to have an ecosystem that's ready to go and prevent that threat that's going to come.
Perfect. Thanks, Satish. The interconnectedness is quite astounding when you just think of how all it's kind of built together. Daniel, maybe just from your perspective, come from your organization and this recently kind of new coalition you're part of, and anything you would kind of add to that, just to kind of round out kind of what Satish and Clement mentioned.
Sure. So, just talking about what this threat is from the beginning, I would echo what Clement said at the beginning. Let me use the easy to remember phrase, right? Harvest now, decrypt later. Encrypted communications, for instance, transactions and other kind of material being communicated over the internet today can be stored in encrypted format by an eavesdropper, an adversary, And the idea is that when a quantum computer emerges, that adversary who now has this large-scale quantum computer, cryptographically relevant quantum computer, when it emerges, we'll be able to decrypt into the past and unveil, information in the clear that was sent today, that was sent yesterday, that was sent, even tomorrow, until the migration from the quantum vulnerable systems, the cryptographic communication systems, have been upgraded to quantum safe cryptographies. And so it turns out this is a massive effort. It requires upgrading billions, hundreds of billions devices, software, replacing hardware, and the logistical engineering task is massive. It's larger than Y2K. And so that's
making me nervous, Daniel. Okay, so look, we've got a lot of folks on this call here. Probably going to wonder, how should we start getting started? This threat's real. It's coming. How soon should a lot of these, efforts, should banks start to get underway, given they've got busy schedules, a lot of other, big risks? Maybe Daniel, I'll continue with you. Just some of your thoughts of just how long post-quantum takes in planning efforts around that.
It is, again, a large-scale effort. So part of this PQC, post-quantum cryptography coalition that MITRE has stood up is trying to bring together hyperscalers in industry, the large tech companies, and anyone who has capabilities to kind of coordinate efforts to accelerate this transition. We're expecting that it is going to take, years to actually make this migration occur. And one of the challenging things is we don't know when Q day is. We don't know when the day when a large-scale quantum computer emerges will be, whereas it was really easy with Y2K, you know, January 1st, 2000, okay? But we don't know, and so there's a lot of uncertainty and hesitancy about when I have to do stuff. I know that various U.S. national government memoranda have gone out. For instance, there's national security memoranda, I think it's 12 or something recently, that mandates that federal agencies in the United States migrate with a variety of different timelines, the primary one being 2030, having finished the full migration.
Wow. Satish, you're at a bank, like, I'm sure you've got efforts underway. Can you just give a bit of your perspective of where this fits in and how, without specific details, let us kind of know what your thoughts are on that?
Yeah, definitely, right. I mean, as Daniel was talking about it, right, it's a long-term play, right? I mean, if you think about like traditional cryptographic migrations historically, right, in some cases have taken more than 10 years for a narrow slice of cryptographic ecosystem, like going from RSA 1024 to 2048, right? I mean, depending on the size of the company, the size of the application environment, and the complexity of the environment, it takes a long time. And in this scenario, we're not just talking about one slice of a cryptographic upgrade from 1024 to 2048 or any other encryption methodologies. We're essentially talking about transitioning the majority of the cryptographic ecosystem. So in my mind, financial institutions or any institutions should be planning for their strategic PQC migration already, or at least mapping out the steps to produce an enterprise migration strategy. And that's where everybody is. We are all in the starting phase of this journey, but we need to start now in terms of putting that migration strategy together. And additionally, there's a significant body of work that needs to be accomplished before any migration activities can happen. You need to be able to understand, do an asset discovery, you have to do risk analytics, you have to do prioritization, you have to understand the solution and technology approach, and the consideration of performing this transition in an agile framework, right? I mean, you need to be in a place and you're positioned for a long game of multiple transitions in decades to come with as little disruptions as possible. And that's where it becomes very important to start the work now. And again, when you ask about like how much should I invest versus how much should I not, it really depends on the complexity of the environment that you have. And no one is saying that you need to have hundreds of people right now on this migration effort right now, because you don't even know what that migration effort looks like. You are really in the early phases of this journey, understanding the plan, understanding the approach, understanding, doing some R&D in terms of the solutions and the technology stack, what algorithms you're going to use. So I think it all depends on what your R&D capabilities are in-house and where do you invest in it. And this should be one of the top priority investments that you make in your institution to further your capabilities of PQC and the potential quantum threat.
Perfect. No, that's excellent, Satish. Kind of maybe I'm going to pull Clement maybe to the next question here, almost like a bit of a sandbox view. But look, post-quantum computing, you're getting into the trade-off. And look, we've got a lot of CISOs on this call, a lot of day-to-day responsibilities, and this is a future risk that they're managing. How would you advise CISOs on the call here to kind of balance this kind of trade-off that they need to make? And maybe Clement, I'll kind of pull this to you to kind of kick us off here based on all the conversations you've had with various organizations.
Yeah, that's a good point, because there's also a lot of conflicting messaging around this risk, and I think it's important to build clarity. So first, as Satish said, we're looking at a migration that may take 10 years or more. In the past it took 10 years, and this one is more complex, so it might be more than 10 years. And the risk that quantum computers are fault tolerant is something that might happen in 8 to 12 years. So that's the kind of time frame we're looking at. There's no need to be quantum resistant next year or in 2 years. And I think it's important to state that. But back to what Satish was saying, what large organizations and any digitalized business needs to have in mind is that they need to build a new capability, a new internal IT management capability to be able to transition cryptography when the time comes. And not only once, but several times, because we're looking at probably standards that will evolve several times in the coming years. And as Satish said, you want to be ready to do this kind of migration for probably a few decades, actually. So what is complex, what takes time, is to build this new internal IT management capability. And we're just talking about, another type of IT management software platform, for instance, that needs to get integrated into your existing workflow automation system, ticketing, vulnerability management systems. And this takes time. Everybody knows that onboarding a new type of software inside a large organization where there's a lot of legacy systems, a lot of heterogeneous systems, it's a multi-year effort. So this is the reason why we're seeing a large organization, financial services, start these initiatives now. And for many of the largest banks on the planet, they've already started that. They have teams working on it. They have budgets working on it. And so I think CISOs should go to the board, say it's not a 0-day thing that we need to fix, in the next 48 hours. We can plan, but we need to plan now, and we need to get started now.
Perfect. Daniel, I'm going to pull you in. When we have the prep call here, we had a good conversation on pulling this into existing security initiatives, and it's almost like the two birds with one stone kind of analogy. Can you maybe just elaborate on that? Because I actually thought that was some great insights and some practical advice that you can give to our folks on the call.
Yeah, absolutely. So this would be to the CISOs right here in the audience, where you may be. This is certainly MITRE's perspective, MITRE Lab's perspective, is that when you start talking about this threat of a quantum computer, and you start saying we need to migrate our cryptography, and you start now counting, all of the costs and efforts and energy that this is going to take to deal with a threat, I would say don't only view this as a threat. The threat is the motivator to act now. That's something, for instance, that you can take to, the board, for instance, and use as a motivator. However, you can also view it as an opportunity. There are other things aside from PQC that are very relevant and very important to kind of deal with in parallel, simultaneously. For instance, the migration to a zero trust architecture. ZTA is another thing that's been standardized by NIST and is a major effort that's going on. Similarly, you might imagine that, well, there's some cycle where I will replace my cryptographic hardware boxes, right? I need, FPGAs or other kind of hardware security modules that you may have throughout your, management of IT for your bank or organization, where you can say, well, this is a motivation for me to refresh all of this sort of archaic, hardware and software. I would strongly encourage using PQC as a motivator to refresh your overall IT infrastructure and include other, modern ideas like zero trust architecture, just get, basically cleaning out just the old stuff that's in the system and making it, modernized.
Perfect. No, thanks, Daniel. And Satish, like being one that's got a long list of things you're working on. We had a conversation on the various tech stacks and integrating all of that. Can you maybe just comment on that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I can't agree more with Daniel on this, right? I mean, PQC is not the only option to protect what you have today in the environment, right? You still need to take action in your current environment in protecting the data. I mean, I know some of us touched on handle, harvest not decrypt later attached, right? It's happening, and we know it's happening today where the data is being harvested. You need to be able to protect that data. And there's a lot of things that you can do today in terms of applying the best-in-class cryptographic implementations and solutions to your environment. I'm pretty sure if you look deeper into your organization and your environment, whether it's software, hardware, I'm sure there are opportunities where you can find, okay, hey, there's other migrations that I can do from a cryptography standpoint that can devalue the data. The key word is devaluing the data. The more you invest in devaluing the data today, the less risk that you will have tomorrow, even if your bad actors or threat actors are having your data, they can't do anything with it. So focus on devaluing your data in your current environment while you work on migrating to PQC ecosystem in the future. And again, with PQC, a lot of the work today, again, with the start of the journey, is still in R&D phase. Be engaged, be involved in what's happening from an industry standpoint. And if you have an opportunity to partner with anyone and kind of test out some of the algorithms and some of the future state quantum resistant. And again, a lot of algorithms are coming out every single day, but every single day they're being broken as well. Right? So there's a lot of evolution, continuous evolution happening. So that's all you can do is right now plan, get involved, and be on the forefront of that emerging technology while you still take care of your existing environment with the latest and greatest technologies that you have to protect your data and your environment.
Perfect. So lots of planning. Can we talk maybe 2-3 years out of where this is going? Like I know a lot of my clients I'm involved in a lot of regulatory conversations of just where the regulators are starting to get on top of this. But can we now start to kind of think 2, 3, 4 years down the road? Maybe Clint, just any kind of advice, feedback of with your crystal ball that you've got in front of you, where this is going.
Yeah, well, my crystal ball is very much informed by discussions I have with customers, and also what we're seeing happen in the landscape. So I think everybody is aware of the NIST competition. The first standards would be published next year, and many security agencies around the world have reached a consensus that it's time to act now in order to be ready by 2030, something like that. We've seen the White House memorandums that Daniel mentioned, and I'm talking about regulators both in Europe, in the US, North America. Also, we're seeing this in APAC region. So there's some kind of very consistent body of recommendations that emerge from regulators around that, because they understand that, again, the threat is not to be ready when these computers are out there.
Perfect. Daniel, do you want to maybe add on, kind of from, your MITRE kind of perspective?
Sure. Yeah. So looking into the future, I mean, so from the MITRE perspective, the part of the reason we're kind of assembling this large consortium of industry players, including SandboxAQ, for instance, and many others, and we're sort of trying to act as a neutral party to try and discuss things and get a very broad perspective from many different areas of industry, academia, government, et cetera. One of the things, for instance, of course, has been regulation, and actually tracking down these, regulatory movements across, 100+ countries is a giant task. But where I see things going will be that there will be some deadline set by most players, by which I mean, regulators, even for banks within national borders or even regional borders, that will eventually give you deadlines for certain things must be post-quantum certain ways. And along with that, I should mention also I was on the NIST standardization team for 5 years before joining MITRE, where these standards are coming out. I would expect them to be finally formalized early this next year, so within months.
Okay.
We'll have, it will be green light. You can now actually begin the formal deployment. For the past, handful of years, people have been preparing for that to try and be first movers in space. And I think that, the effort now is to carry along not only the first movers, but the entire ecosystem. As Satish said, it is a majority of the ecosystem needs to do this migration. It is probably the largest scale migration that has ever occurred in cryptography.
Perfect. Daniel, I'm going to just add on, and this is one of the questions kind of coming in of, so what work are you actually going to begin when you can't migrate to a crypto system that hasn't been approved by NIST? So you're kind of saying in the kind of next year or so, things are going to start to change.
Well, so let me give you the recent timeline, data points about the NIST process, asking about, I can't migrate till NIST as a standard officially out. The decisions for the first 4 algorithms, they were originally called Kyber Lithium, Falcon Sphinx Plus. They're now called ML-Chem, MLDS. So the government acronyms. Those were announced on, so this was July, I believe, 5, 2022. So a little over a year ago. The initial drafts for 3 of those, the public key encryption scheme, and 2 of the digital signatures were put for public comment. I believe it was a couple months ago, and that period should be ending anytime now if it hasn't already ended. Once that 90-day public comment period's ended, it will take the NIST team, I would say, some small number of months, 3, 4, 5 months, and then they will post it on the U.S. Federal Register, at which point it will be as official can be. So given the current timeline, I would say minimally early 2024, maybe even the first quarter of 2024.
Okay, wonderful. Tying it in just as we kind of start to wrap up, and I see some questions starting to come in, I thought that was just good to kind of tie that one in. Satish, I'm going to lead with you just as your kind of final recommendation here. We've got kind of 3-4 minutes before I'll open up to a few questions. What recommendations would you give to the audience? And if you can just kind of sum up all this up into kind of 1 or 2 quick points.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we've been talking a lot about planning, right? Again, we're not ready for migration yet. As we know, we're still in the early phases of the journey, but there's a lot of things that we can do to get ready, right? And depending on the scale and complexity of your environment, more IT automation. I think when this happens, it's going to happen fast, and you want to be ready for migration as fast as you can, right? So build IT automation into your environment. You need to have better risk management and better risk posture. How are you going to govern and scale and migrate? Improve your data governance and management, right? You need to discover and catalog everything, right? You need to understand your current state. You need to understand where your gaps are. You need to understand where you are from a cryptographic implementations across your systems. You need to have tools to evaluate and test algorithms, libraries, and vendor toolkits, because there's going to be a whole host of things that will be available eventually as these things are being developed. You need to be able to ready and test. You should right now think about establishing a good R&D program if you don't already have, to test and evaluate alternative mitigation technologies. And you need to be able to increase the ability to centrally manage and monitor all of your enterprise implementation of your cryptographic solutions. And again, you need to start thinking about the future and architecture and design of your systems and bring in crypto agility, because that's going to be very important into your environment. So when you think about all of those things, there's a lot of things that you can plan now and start working on a migration strategy. When the date comes, you are ready, and then you can have as smooth of a process as you can to get your enterprise ready for migration.
Perfect. Thank you, Satish. Come on. Do you want to maybe just kind of your one final takeaway for this group?
Yeah, three things to have in mind, I think. One, PQC is happening regardless of quantum computers. I mean, the new standards are going to be published, and everyone will migrate, even if some finding quantum computers, fault-tolerant quantum computers, takes another 20 years. So the migration is happening regardless of the timeline on quantum computers. Second point is, planning for the migration starts by building an inventory of your cryptography and being able to manage the content of your inventory. Back to what Satish was mentioning, this delivers very solid value to IT management teams today. So we're not talking about a return on investment in 10 years, 8 years, 12 years. We see many, many pain points inside organizations around the lack of tooling to manage cryptography. Things like certificate outages, or just critical workloads going down because one piece of cryptography is deprecated in a component and the application just crashes. Compliance issues, both internal and external. It's very difficult to report on the cryptography that you're using inside all your applications, for instance, or just your, let's say, most 1,000 critical applications. So building crypto agility, and that's my conclusion, bringing in this new IT management capability that I was referring to earlier. This allows you to tackle some of these issues. And that's what we see with some of our customers. They can reduce the number of outages. They can be better at automating compliance and reporting on what cryptography they're using. They're saving time, they're saving money, they're building more automation, more agility today, not in 10 years. And I think that's also something that CISOs should bring to their board when they start planning and asking for resource for this project.
Perfect. Great feedback. We're going to start jumping into some of the questions here. We've kind of hit the question period, and I'm going to first one I'm going to maybe jump to, maybe even Clement, maybe just so you can expand on that a little bit, is what was the best way to start building a cryptographic inventory? So you kind of touched on it, a little bit of kind of some of the sandbox capabilities there, but can you just maybe give a couple quick kind of sound bites on kind of best way to do that, and any advice for folks on the call?
So the first thing is you need to prioritize, because IT systems today are so big and so complex, you will not be able to build an inventory on everything at once. So you need to decide whether you're more focused on looking at cryptographic artifacts, like where are all your keys, all your certificates, your cryptographic libraries on your endpoints, or whether you want to look at cryptography at the application level, for instance. So how your applications actually execute cryptographic functions. And that's not only to encrypt data, but also for authentication, signing, everything that cryptography does. Or you might want to focus on the network. I have to say that in our experience, what we see is that the first targets are either the endpoints or the applications, and the network is a bit secondary now, probably because the protection will be a bit easier to deploy in the network than on endpoints and applications. And then you need to prioritize the data again, and the workloads that you want to migrate first. You need to start with the high-value assets.
Perfect. Satish, I'm going to bring you in on this question here, and it gets at the heart of, I know, questions my CISOs are asking, like, what are the drivers that will realistically free up funding for testing and validation? What are you seeing in terms of the market with respect to spend on post-quantum computing?
Yeah, as I said earlier, I think we are in the early phases. I think it all goes down to, I'm sure every company has some level of investment capability for their research and development and innovation. One of the key things to consider in this space is having a conversation with your business counterparts and explaining why this is important and why we need to invest in it. And I would recommend this not being a hobby or being like a 10% of someone's role from a day-to-day perspective in investing in this. You need to, even if it is one or two individuals or three individuals that can just focus on pure innovation and emerging technologies, and you're able to go and have the conversation with your business units and say, this is why it's important. It's not just because it's the latest and greatest technology, but it's basically coming to threaten our existence of our transactions and critical transactions that we do with our internally within our bank or with our partners or with our vendors, and managing financial assets for us from a financial institution standpoint is the very basic thing that we need to protect our transactions and the data that goes with it. So I think there's a large education and evangelism that needs to happen across the senior leaders and across the organizations on why we need to do that. And I would have some level of dedicated investment, and the investment varies depending on the size of your organization and what you're doing, including, I think you need to have an environment, I would say, definitely some kind of a innovation lab, I would say, where you can isolate your testing and test with different, either you're developing your own internal algorithms or partnering with someone else or partnering with some industry leaders in the space, bringing in hardware, software kind of combination capabilities where you can test in an isolated environment without disruption to your production environment, and have a dedicated team of individuals that are purely focused on this migration path and the emerging tech. That's the approach I would go about it. The amount of investment really depends on where you are from an organization standpoint.
Perfect. Thank you, Satish. Daniel, I'm going to turn over to you, and there's a number of questions that kind of really in your domain here, and maybe enough you can kind of see them if you want to maybe touch on a few of them and just kind of run down them. I'm probably easier if you maybe just quite going to lightning fashion kind of.
Yeah, I'm just going to kind of go in order for a couple of these and try and give quick responses. A whole list here, right? So. Can we make a distinction between public key vulnerabilities and symmetric ciphers? Let me say in general that NIST's guidance is that you don't have to change anything. The only thing that's known to affect AES, in particular AES, is the Grover algorithm, which is non-parallelizable. There's some FAQ information on the NIST PQC website addressing specifically that. My general guidance would be everyone should be deploying anything new at AES 256, and there's no need for a doubling of that. You don't need an AES 512, just AES 256. If you're using triple DES, please upgrade it to AES 256. That's sort of my advice on symmetric, and in general, you know, it should be safe. It's a very simple upgrade. Just use the longer key length of AES. There was another question here. This is another question about symmetric. This timeline applies to block ciphers. Again, if you're using AES 128.256, I think you're going to be fine. I would recommend 256. I don't know if NIST will officially sunset the validity of triple DES on what timeline. I believe that they are going to attempt to not create giant chaos and disruption in industry, but I'm sure for a fact that they would like everyone to be using AES 256 at this point for the financial industry. Someone asked about training courses available on PQC. One of the things the MITRE Coalition is a team put together in concert with many, many partners, including, for instance, claimants, you know, SandboxAQ, IBM, for instance, has a thing out there, kind of a training course available. Let me answer maybe one other question and then I'll pause here. So the hybrid approach that Sebastian asks about in the Q&A, the idea here might be maybe use multiple cryptographic algorithms in parallel to do your key exchange for the asymmetric case, or maybe you have multiple digital signature schemes in parallel, and this could be hybridization across a trusted thing previously like elliptic curves. It could be hybridized with maybe one of the post-quantum solutions. You could hybridize across multiple post-quantum solutions. This is an issue of much discussion in the IETF. It is not resolved yet. And in fact, my recommendation on hybridization choices would be to slow down the discussion. I think it's happening a little too fast in the IETF. And you know, a lot of the suggestions have some pros, but also a lot of cons. And so I think this is sort of the struggle, that the algorithms are going to be ready by 2024 for post-quantum, but if you want to do hybrid solutions that mix these new post-quantum algorithms with others, or even mix among post-quantum, you probably need to wait for IETF. It's going to take longer for them to actually find a best path forward.
Perfect. Thanks, Daniel. The question I'm going to pull in, and I like Clement and Satish, just on the training and certifications. Like, even in getting ready for this, I spent a bit of time just reading what's out there. And it's an interesting one. Like, there's the angle of explaining it to board, to executives, to layman's terms, right down to some even deep technical explanations, and getting right into what is quantum, and you can really get into deep physics conversation there. What resources have you used, and any advice on just getting different levels of training to start to bring other people along on the journey? And as executives, that's such an important role. So maybe Satish, a bit of your view, and Clement, if there's any resources out there you'd recommend for people, because I think it's important that we just keep building on that knowledge.
I think definitely. I mean, I think, of course, I mean, Google is a big help in everything, right? But also, I would say, I mean, as Daniel mentioned, I mean, there's NIST and also FSI-SAC for financial institutions have published a lot of papers on that as well. And a lot of companies like IBM, Google, and others who are spearheading some of these evolutions have published as well as our internal research that we do with different organizations. We combine all of that information. Again, a lot of regulatory work is happening in terms of figuring out what this means for the future. So combination of regulatory discussions, standard bodies like FSI-SAC and MITRE and others, and also vendor conversations, along with our own internal research. I think there's a lot of different avenues where we start to pull this information together. But again, translating all of that technical aspects of what PQC is and what it means to the enterprise is a different thing that you have to take internally with yourself and say, okay, how do I explain this to my senior leaders? How do I explain this to my CIOs? How do I explain this to my business partners, right? I mean, that is very important. You need to be able to translate why PQC is important and why do we invest now versus waiting for later, and what does it get us, right? And how does it protect our business and disruption in our business from a day-to-day perspective. So there's a lot of there's not one place at this point because there's a lot of research happening everywhere. So I would definitely look at from standard bodies like FSISAC and MITRE and other NIST and other places where they've published some public papers on it. And also, if you have worked with some companies that have been pioneering in a lot of these areas, then I would go with that as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Satish. And Clement, any just words to add to complement that great advice Satish provided?
Honestly, not much more to add. Just inside SandboxAQ, we have a team dedicated to producing educational content around quantum physics and its applications, and also AI. It's not only dedicated to our cybersecurity business unit, but also the other products that we're developing. So we have some great content available around PQC and the quantum risk, but also the quantum opportunities in other fields. This is super important because, as you said, Steve, these topics are very, very, very complex to a point that nobody is actually absolutely sure to understand what quantum physics is. There's this very famous quote by a quantum physicist who says, if you think you understand quantum physics, it probably means that you don't understand quantum physics. So it's key, for decision-making people who are engaging budgets and teams on this to actually understand what the high-level technical background is around these topics and how this can impact their business. The resources that Satish mentioned, I think, are excellent. What you can find with those vendors.
The one small plug I'll just add, and this is something I came across a couple of years ago. It was a YouTube video of explaining quantum physics at a grade school level, and then they did a high school level, and they did grad school, and just to kind of hear the different explanations and sort of started getting it. When they got to grad school, I had to kind of tap out a little bit. It started getting a bit beyond some of my capabilities. But look, as we start to kind of wrap this up, look, I'm going to maybe give you for a final, call it 20 seconds of just any final last points you'd like to mention, and then we'll kind of put this at a wrap. As I said, we'll be kind of sending this out. There's some great information that folks can look at. But maybe Daniel, any just final 20 seconds, 15 seconds, any comments to add?
Well, the first comment, education is the silver bullet here. Education is lacking more than anything else. There's not even a textbook in this area. Aside from that, I would say that, you should start planning now, acting now, even if you can. You should reach out to people that are experts in the field and make sure that you're planning in the correct way. If you get behind, it's going to really hurt. It's better to do your homework early rather than turn it in late. And last thing I would say is there are many very interesting questions that are easy to answer in the chat, but we don't have time. So I don't know if we can share email addresses. People can ask those questions directly to us after this event.
Wonderful. Perfect. Satish?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say one thing. I mean, again, being in the financial institutions, this is not something like a cool technology that, okay, I'll wait for this cool technology to evolve and get mature before I can start to look at it and what I need to do. But this is something, it's an eventuality, right? I mean, this is going to happen. Quantum computers is going to be a reality. So we know the threat that quantum computers eventually is going to bring into the environment. So I would say, I mean, this is not optional. This is something that we take seriously, and we like to plan and be ahead of the game, and also drive and contribute for the broader industry reach, right? I mean, I think that's the opportunity we have. And again, as I said initially, it requires an ecosystem approach and not an individualistic approach, because we are all intertwined in terms of how we operate in the ecosystem today. So it has to be an ecosystem approach and not a one-person solution.
Perfect. I love that. And you know what, maybe on that note, we're at time, and I know everyone's got busy schedules. So thank you for all attending. I love the idea, Daniel. We'll try to answer questions sent back. Hope you found it useful. Please reach out and have a great rest of the day. Thank you to the panel members for the wonderful thoughts, comments, and feedback, and SandboxAQ for help putting this together. So thank you very much, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.